What's happening, folks? Just getting rolling here on my commute home. Play a little bit with camera position today, so bear with me on that. What's happening, Andrew? I saw that you'd be here. Appreciate you stopping by. I don't know if you guys caught in the notes today, the description of today's stream, but we're going to be talking about the medical profession and the reluctance to back down when contrary evidence is presented. Seems to happen an awful lot in the scientific community lately, and over the past several decades, as I found out in some of my research on this one. Kind of funny, I actually learned quite a bit out of this that I wasn't aware of. There's a reoccurring theme to a lot of this that really throws a wrench in where I was originally going to this, but like any good man, I am willing to admit when I'm wrong and point it out and go the direction where the truth leads, as I hope anybody would. Hey Kodiak, what's happening? Thanks for stopping in. Yeah, so a couple of big pieces in the news here lately. First, the big announcement today by the medical community. What's happening, Coder? Glad to see you. No, I won't, but well, we're hoping not to crash anyway. I'm heading towards the worst of traffic instead of away from it at this point. Just a quick reminder for those of you who haven't caught previous streams, if you want me to catch a comment, because I'm not legally supposed to be messing around with text messaging and whatnot, please type it in all caps and keep it short. If it's short, I can catch it at a glance as I'm transferring from mirror to mirror, but I cannot focus on the texting that's going on. I hate to wind up in jail, you know, big brother watching. So the big announcement today by some in the medical community is it's actually really funny because it's a big announcement today, even though some of my research has shown that this evidence has been around since as early as the 1940s, that there is no distinct link between high cholesterol and heart disease. There's no direct link between fat consumption and heart disease. And for some reason now, all of a sudden, this is huge news, even though the research that I did on the food pyramid, which is going to be another topic to talk about today, the research that I did on the food pyramid has stated that since the early 1900s, that has been the big fight between the cattle, egg, and dairy farmers and the USDA and the agricultural community, the row crop community, as it's called. There are the food guidelines that we know today started in as early as the 1800s. It was a guy by the name of Dr. Wilbur Atwater who started the Office of Experiment Stations, which was attached to the USDA. That was the early, well, I shouldn't say early, it was in the 1800s. That was, again, attached to the USDA. Then, in 1902, the USDA Farmer Bulletin started pushing dietary recommendations that were geared towards a low-fat, high-carb diet. No research that had been done had suggested that the suggestion that high sugar, high fat, high cholesterol diets were not true. There was no credible evidence, and there was evidence to the contrary about carbs and sugar. But the USDA, through the USDA Farm Bulletin, started pushing this narrative, and the beef, egg, and dairy industry went absolutely nuts. And it's absolutely no good, because there was the USDA, an apparent agenda, not I can find a direct link where anything pointed directly to it, but you're going to see as I keep going through some of these statistics and dates and organizations that the USDA is a continually reoccurring presence, which is mind-boggling to me, because doesn't cattle and eggs and milk, all dairy, all fall under the USDA? Aren't they under the same umbrella? I haven't been able to establish a link yet. I'm going to keep digging for a future stream on why the USDA seems to want to shoot itself in the foot for one segment, its regulatory authority, while growing another segment. I'm guessing, now this is just my hypothesis, I have no evidence to it yet, but it's my guess that there is vastly more money or more power available in loosening the regulations on agriculture and tightening the regulations, or loosening the public sentiment over grain-based crops versus livestock crops. And in 1940, the USDA, pause the stream, guys. We got good sound today and not a whole lot of vibration in the camera. Hey, Daylight, what's happening? Oh no, sorry, can't read your name. Backstage, gotcha. So the USDA in 1940, even though there was still competing evidence and no discernible link, thank you, no discernible link. That was an incoming phone call, sorry about that. Cut that off. Everybody knows I get done at this time, so that may happen more than once, but we'll just make them wait. There is, even though in 1940 there was still no concrete evidence, no direct link, or even circumstantial evidence that a high-fat, high-cholesterol diet had a direct link to heart disease, the USDA put out the recommended daily allowances, which favored grains and grain-based foods. Then, in 1946, they started developing the food pyramid, or what we know as the modern-day food pyramid. There were 7 different food groups at that time. And because of competing research that was disputing what the USDA was putting out, in 1996, they reduced it to what we know now as the 4 basic food groups. And they found in that there was no pyramid yet, but they had all kinds of different propaganda posters and the like to push this agenda of the 4 basic food groups and the recommended daily allowances. Then in 1967, CBS comes along, and they produced a special called Hunger in America, and directly linked poverty and starvation rates with opposition to the USDA's detractors. The basic aim of the CBS documentary was to point out that food was too expensive and too scarce, and that federal food subsidies were needed for individuals to be able to maintain a healthy and substantial diet to prevent starvation. So the USDA reacts immediately, starts pushing food stamps, and the USDA products, and some of you that are my age and older will remember the old white carton, black writing USDA cheese. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, it wasn't changing cell towers. That was work calling, so I had to take that one. I know he had a pretty good flow there. I really apologize for that. Back to the 1967 CBS report, though, on hunger in America and the propagation of the beginnings of the extreme welfare state with the USDA subsidies. I hope that there's some of you in here old enough that remember hey, Kodiak, looks like you're the only one that stuck it out too. I appreciate that. Oh no, we got some coming back. All right. So I don't know if you guys remember the white package, black writing, USDA cheese, USDA peanut butter, USDA powdered milk, nasty stuff. Oh gosh, that stuff was horrible. I grew up on that. We used that when I was a kid. But the goal of the USDA in 1967, hashtag me too, there you go. The goal in 1967 by the USDA after this CBS report came out was to end hunger. Get this one. This is I just had to laugh my ass off about this. Their goal was to end hunger by the end of 1969. So they wanted to end hunger in 2 years in the United States by pumping out that nasty cheese and peanut butter. To me, it was just another example of government expansion and ignoring study after study after study. The articles that I was reading and the sites that I was going to all talked about multiple, me too, right? Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, after eating that cheese, you were pounding something. But the expansion of the state and the outrageous goals, the idea that you're going to end hunger in the United States in 2 years simply by increasing grain production, and not only increasing grain production but telling people don't eat. I mean, look at how deadly eggs were said to be for so long. Oh, the cholesterol in the yolk, you got to eat egg whites. What's happening? The cholesterol in egg whites or egg yolks, the cholesterol in butter, so we got to use margarine, and then we find out how bad margarine is for us because it actually changes at the molecular level when they're producing it, and how bad beef was, and that's where the 1980s Where's the Beef campaign came out. They were trying to salvage the beef industry, but because of the increase in grain consumption, they'd already made beef more expensive. Then Senator George McGovern, your buddy and mine, Senator George McGovern, and his bipartisan efforts to limit fat and cholesterol intake and push this idea that fat and cholesterol were bad, and carbs and sugars were okay, gave birth to the USDA current food pyramid that they had basically stolen from the Swedes, or at least adapted theirs, their rudimentary one from one of the Swedish models putting out in 1988. In the 1980s and 1990s, there were dozens. Right now, I'm currently in Plymouth, Minnesota. I am on the 494 loop heading north. The final destination for this evening is Brainerd, Minnesota. That's where our yard is at. That's where the truck and trailer will end up, as well as the freight that's in the trailer, and it'll get distributed onto different trucks tomorrow out of Brainerd. So I am headed for Brainerd with this, and then parts north beyond that to my home. But in the 1980s and 90s, there were dozens of revisions to the food pyramid and the RD guidelines, the recommended daily allowance guidelines, until they finally settled on the 2,000 calorie diet guidelines in the 1990s. And in the 1990s was the birth of the ketogenic diet. The 1990s was when we started hearing about the Atkins diet and things of that nature that were flying in the face of everything that the USDA had been putting out, everything that the Atkins, yep, the ketogenic Atkins diet, they're almost one and the same. The amount of resources and power that the USDA had gained through these programs, though, they still ignore the benefits to a low-carb, low-sugar diet. They are reluctantly now having to look at studies, which, again, that's where I started this stream, and I thought it was absolutely hilarious. The announcements just today that are supposed to be big news that have been around since the late 1800s, early 1900s, about how there is absolutely no link between high-fat, high-cholesterol diets and heart disease. They have never, ever, with as much as they've pushed. And there's also another link here that is really driving me nuts that I wasn't able to find anything on, but I think is as obvious as the big Scottish nose on my face, is the fact that at the same time the big push started in the 1960s and 70s, and again, I cannot find a direct link, so this is all hypothesis. I'm not nailing any particular concrete evidence down, but this is my hypothesis. It's in direct correlation with the creation of the pharmaceutical statin drugs and how we have been told for decades, even though there's been no link, there's been evidence to the contrary that cholesterol and heart disease do not have any direct links, that these statin drugs come on the market in the 90s and the early 2000s. That was all you heard about how us fat white guys needed to get on these statin drugs because we were refusing to buy into the drug culture, but cholesterol is going to kill you. Cholesterol is going to give you heart disease, and you're going to have a heart attack. And you've seen people who have had heart attacks, so this is a perfect scare tactic. The amount of money that the USDA has invested in this, and now the pharmaceutical companies have invested in this, nobody wants to pay attention to it. Now I think they're having a hard time ignoring it with the announcements today. And from 2010 to 2016, this is how deeply entrenched. Anybody know what happened in our government between 2010 and 2016? What was going on in that time? That was a cell tower issue. Sorry. Movie Lorenzo's Oil. No, I have not. I will check that one out. Lorenzo Oil. That has to do with cholesterol and fat and whatnot, I'm guessing, hopefully. From 2010 to 2016, under the great tutelage of our Lord and Savior President Barack Obama, the USDA still continued to propagate the low-fat, high-carb diet. The health junkie Michelle Obama said we were just taking in too many calories, too much salt, too much fat. There's tons of oils that we need, oils and fats that we need that we're not getting. And it doesn't take very much research, very much digging to find out the sources outside of the U.S. government that are wealths of knowledge when it comes to your omega-3 acids, your omega-6 and 9 acids, your good LDL or LDH cholesterol, I believe it is, the amounts of fats that our body requires just to process the nutrients that we're taking in. For example, myself, I sprained my shoulder a dozen years ago. It's always been an issue, and I started taking glucosamine, and I actually talked to some guys who are huge into this research and huge into these studies, and was taking the glucosamine for nothing, and was getting frustrated because it wasn't doing anything. Started taking flaxseed oil, fish oil, and borax oil. I no longer have any pain, any reduction in movement in my shoulder after just a few months of taking those oils with it, because the vast majority of supplements that you take wind up in the toilet anyway if you're not taking the right supplement with the right other supplement, because your body can't just produce those raw minerals that are manufactured and put into pill form. But I believe it's borax oil or borexyl oil, or it's a 3-in-1 oil. And no, borax is a cleaner, isn't it? Gosh, I can't think of it now. It's fish oil, flaxseed oil, and then another oil that starts with B. I'll have to look at that tonight now because I can't think of what it is off the top of my head. But the problem I have with this whole thing, okay, borax is poisonous. All right, it might be borax. I'm not sure. It's a 3-in-1 oil supplement from I believe it's Spring Valley Supplements. Check it out. Spring Valley or Spring Farm Supplements. But the borage, that's what it is, borage oil. Thank you. Who was that? Kodiak. Perfect. Thanks, buddy. And just a reminder, too, to make it easier for me to read, if you've got a comment that you absolutely want me to see, make sure you type it in all caps and keep it short. It is a little difficult to see that kind of stuff bouncing down the road here. Well, do you want over, buddy, or what? So, the problem I have with that is not so much the government involvement in this, because the government is involved in everything anyway. We know the nefarious things they end up doing under the guise of helping the poor or helping the unhealthy or helping the starving. I mean, those things, it's a constant barrage from the government. So that's not something that it upsets me, but it's not where my problem with this is. My problem with this is it is with the announcement today that we finally got some people in the medical industry. Gas, who's got gas? I don't use gas, I got diesel. The green gold. But anyway, my problem is in the medical community. And the shortcomings of the medical community, getting involved in these studies. You like beer or too much, yeah, any alcohol your body converts to sugar, which is basically the same thing as intaking straight carbs. But, and then after the sugar's not used, it converts it directly into fat instead of actually burning it off. But the problem that I have is among the medical community, and probably the correlation between the medical community taking research grants from the federal government and wanting those research grants to keep coming, so they try to align their research with whatever the current administration's idea is on any particular scientific topic. That's evident in all kinds of different, not just the obvious ones like global warming and the food pyramid, but there's all kinds of studies where if you're not, okay, for everybody that's new to the stream, that happens occasionally. I don't think it's as much of, I chug a ton of data, so Verizon starts to throttle me after 22 gigs, and that's only about 10% of my monthly consumption, and I am using the Verizon network right now, so I get prioritized to the back of the line. So it's the doctors take the Hippocratic Oath, Hippocratic Oath, whatever. They take that oath that says first do no harm. And these research doctors that are linking things that have no business being linked together, that they have no concrete evidence that one is a result of the other. And then the other doctors out there that come up with this contradicting research that don't speak up and say, look, that's not right. Look, I've got this piece of evidence or that piece of evidence, this study, this experiment that all show the opposite. Don't get up there. First, do no harm. That's the first line of that oath. First, do no harm. You can't tell me with the obesity problem, and I'm not a skinny dude. And according to clinical guidelines, I am on the edge of morbidly obese, according to the clinical guidelines. At 245 pounds and 5'10" tall. But these doctors don't speak up. It drives me absolutely bonkers. And then the doctors that are involved in these studies, and the scientists that are involved in these studies, that push these false narratives where they're more worried about their research grants, whether it be from a university or a government or the food industry. I mean, look at the two guys over in Britain that helped extremely cement the European version of the food pyramid. They've both been shamed out of the community now because they were taking huge money from Big Ag in Europe that to push this grain-rich diet because it's cheaper and easier for farmers to produce grains than with a larger yield. What's happening, Jen? Thanks for stopping. It's easier for these farmers to produce large profit margins with big yields than it is to, what's happening, Bandit? Than to come in and do these livestock crops that not only take up large tracts of land, especially if you're going organic, that take large tracts of land for pasture grazing, but also the ones that aren't the organic or semi-organic livestock outfits use high quantities of grains just to keep their animals producing the way they need them to be. And the amount of money that those doctors took over in Britain and the disgrace that they should have faced earlier than they did All right, Jen, take care. We'll see you in a bit. It centers around these doctors. It centers around these scientists and these doctors that are pumping smoke up our butts that really they're not for the public good. And then when the other big issue that I had was the smoking issue. I am a smoker. I've been known to puff my cigars from time to time. And, you know, we, back in 98, Minnesota had the huge tobacco lawsuit with Blue Cross Blue Shield, where the state of Minnesota, Blue Cross Blue Shield, sued tobacco manufacturers because of the huge links. And there are direct links. Don't get me wrong here. There are direct links to smoking and lung cancer. The problem I have is with how smoking has been banned from everywhere, because there was the assumption that was widely accepted and pushed that secondhand smoke is just as deadly as actually smoking the tobacco itself. And that led to the demonization of chewing tobacco. You look at a lot of places around the state of Minnesota, and if smoking is prohibited, it's not smoking that's prohibited, it's all tobacco use. And now with the expansion of the e-cigarette and the vaping culture, now we've got this demonization of vaping, that it's horrific, it's killing people, it's targeted towards kids. There's a lot of smokers that would prefer to use the vaping liquids than actually smoking. Yeah, it is pretty gross, unless you're a chewer like I used to be decades ago, and you never even know I had a chew in, and I swallowed it all. So there was no trying to get out of the way of my spit stream. There was no mumbled speech like some of these guys with the big wad in. I just like tobacco, plain and simple, it boils down to. And then, about a year ago, I heard a report that there were studies that the secondhand smoke, that they couldn't. Now, we've had 20 years since the 1998 tobacco settlement in Minnesota. Thanks, Jen. Welcome back. The secondhand smoke they could find after 20 years of direct research. They could not find a direct link between secondhand smoke and any type of cancer. Even among households where there was a smoker in the household, someone who smoked in the household, the other members of the house were no more likely to contract lung cancer, colon cancer, mouth cancer, throat cancer than any other average American. Then I started doing some digging on it. Not only was that a 2017 study that we heard nothing about, and we hear nothing about in the mainstream media. You've got to go to Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson or some of these other guys to hear any information at all about the low-carb, high-fat, high-protein diets. You do have some doctors in your local doctor's offices that will recommend it, but when they recommend it, they're typically recommending it for diabetics and people with thyroid conditions and other people that are actually trying to lose large quantities of weight. And it is a fast way to lose weight. It's a proven fact that when you put your liver into ketosis, that it turns into, for lack of a better term, a fat burning machine. That it's in some people, it can actually be almost borderline dangerous if they keep their livers in ketosis for much too long. Actually, there's a lot of research that even vegetables, because of the high sugar content and starch, that leafy greens are good, but carrots, things of that nature, and yes, the ketogenic diet, the Atkins diet, can completely reverse type 2 diabetes. It's not as effective on type 1 diabetes, but it can, if practiced religiously. If someone commits, a diabetic, even an insulin-dependent diabetic, commits to the ketogenic diet, they can completely reverse their diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, a little different story. The instances of bad health effects for using the ketogenic diet are so rare, and they're having a trouble linking it directly to the ketogenic diet. There may be other underlying factors that can cause problems like liver disease, liver failure, things of that nature for some individuals, and it's so very rare, but it's pushed by the USDA and the federal government that ketogenic diet bad because you're not getting variety. Again, we go back to the 1940s when the recommended daily allowances were first pushed. The 1940, in the 1902, when the Office of Experimental Stations, a department of the USDA, was founded, that was their basis, is that at specific males, that a balanced diet was the only way to increase longevity and overall health. The instances of the ketogenic diet, I didn't read anyone that was killed, but there are people that can have serious liver issues that, like I said before, are directly linked to potentially other underlying health issues prior to beginning the ketogenic diet, which, who knows, in another 10 years we may find out it's because they were on a high carb diet to begin with, and there was enough damage done, again, pure hypothesis, but that a high carb diet caused damage because the high carb diet causes that one's too long, Kodiak. I'll have to check that one out in the stream when I rewatch it. But the high carb diet makes your pancreas and your insulin system work in overtime. When you're on the high carb diet, or as we call it, the normal American diet, every time you swallow food, because your liver is not in ketosis, you have a glucose spike. Every time you swallow anything edible, don't go there, guys. Anytime you eat, we have a glucose spike because our livers are typically not in ketosis. There are multiple ways to put your liver in ketosis, but I'm kind of getting sidetracked here off of the medical community's responsibility. I want to get back to the secondhand smoke thing real quick too, because I started digging at it, and I thought this 2017 study was a new study that was based on 20 years worth of research because of the 1998 Minnesota tobacco settlement and the war on tobacco in the United States by the federal government and insurance companies. What I found is that there were several studies, 2003, 2013, 2017, all studies showing exactly the same thing, but they were largely ignored by the scientific community and the medical community because the idea that secondhand smoke was bad because firsthand smoke was bad was so widely accepted. There was, okay, brace yourself for this, people, a consensus among the medical and scientific community that secondhand smoke was bad, with the lack of any direct link. Does that sound familiar to anybody? A consensus of the medical and scientific community said that secondhand smoke was bad. And I am so frustrated. The more research I do on this, I am so frustrated with the medical community's lack of taking responsibility for the just outright ignoring credible studies, which brings me to peer-reviewed journals. I learned something about peer-reviewed journals in the last week, that I've always had a mistrust of peer-reviewed journals, whether they be scientific journals, medical journals. What about secondhand? Secondhand smoke has absolutely zero link to any cancer. Even people who live in a home with a smoker who smokes in the home, the people who do not smoke have no greater risk of developing any cancer than anyone who is never around secondhand smoke. No increased risk whatsoever. Absolutely zero link with secondhand smoke. So you could ride around in my semi all day and I can puff on my cigar all day long, and you have absolutely zero increased risk as compared to the rest of the general population of developing any form of cancer. I'm not going to get into that. There are direct links to lung cancer and the ingestion of smoke, but a lot of that boils down to a lot of the other stuff that is put in modern tobacco too. You've got arsenic and ammonia and the added nicotine that's above and beyond natural levels of nicotine in cigarettes, and all the other different, 56, I believe, different chemicals that are added to tobacco and commercially produced tobacco. Chemicals that are completely unnatural to tobacco itself and are completely foreign. My father-in-law's actually started to grow tobacco, and his first crop should be dry next spring. So I'm kind of curious to see, being a commercial tobacco user for most of my adult life, and some of my adolescent life as well, that the difference between natural tobacco and commercially produced tobacco. I actually hope that I like it better. I believe I will, but again, that's to be seen. So it's just, when it comes to secondhand smoke and the food pyramid and the propaganda that cholesterol causes heart disease, driving truck causes, okay, I missed that. Driving truck causes back. Well, yeah, absolutely it does. Sit on our duff all day long. That's like saying hiking mountains causes foot issues. Duh. Thanks, Kodiak. Captain Obvious today. Love you, brother. But no, it's my problem isn't with the government involvement in this crap, because the government tries to get involved in as much as they can, as often as they can, and they take no oath guaranteeing, taking an oath vowing that they're looking out for our best interests. They say they are, but they make no direct vow, and even if they did, they would manipulate it for their own best interests, as they've done time and time again. My problem is with the medical community, a community that's supposed to be, yeah, it looks like a rough road. It's not exactly a wonderfully smooth road. It's I-94 westbound in Monticello, Minnesota. But the reason I have an air ride suspension, an air ride cab, and an air ride seat. With the combination of those two, it looks like I'm getting bounced around, but it's actually the cab that's moving, where my butt pretty much stays in the same place and absorbs a lot of the shock of the road. And not only that, but I also have a lot of extra weight in the they do, because the FDA scares a lot of doctors, as well as the USDA. See, in all of the stuff that I read had absolutely nothing to do with the FDA, which you would think it was Food and Drug Administration. All of the research I did, all of the articles I did, every major change in food policy in the United States and globally can all be linked back to the USDA or USDA involvement in helping foreign countries shape policy. The problem I have, though, again, I want to reiterate this, is that the doctors take the oath to first do no harm. I understand, government's scary, but government's scary because we've let it get too big, that it has the power to be scary to these different. We've given it too much control. It's expanded way beyond its constitutional mandate, which is evident in every facet. Truck drivers, next to airline pilots and railroad engineers, not rail industry, railroad engineers. We are the highest regulated industry in the world. Trump's out there. Ooh, I'm hitting a nerve now with the YouTube overlords threatening they're in bed with. And I see a big tobacco comment. It's too long there for me to read, but I don't want to take any responsibility away from Big Tobacco. Big Tobacco had some pretty horrible advertising campaigns, and they hid as much of the research about the links between smoking and lung cancer and the ill effects of that, along with emphysema and other negative effects that smoking can have, when they started pushing. See, people have been smoking forever, for a long time. The problem is when Big Tobacco was born and they started mass producing cigarettes, not tobacco, but cigarettes, they started increasing. People that were smokers, that would be considered smokers, may have only smoked a couple of cigarettes a day or a couple of cigarettes a week. Because they weren't the addictive cigarette that we know today. It was a leisure pleasure. It was a recreational pastime. It wasn't, oh my goodness, I gotta hurry up and get to 10 o'clock break so I can go outside and puff down 2 cigarettes in 15 minutes really quick, because I don't know if I'm gonna be able to take it. Commercially produced cigarettes are so different than what tobacco consumption used to be, and I'm not going to relieve Big Tobacco from any of their responsibility, but I also have a problem. I don't switch out trucks. This has been my truck for 2.5 years. It's a 2012, I believe, Ford T800, 210-inch wheelbase, 330 horse Cummins ISM, dual exhaust, unbaffled. A-cab with an extension on it, which gives me room to keep room. Thanks for reminding me, everybody, Cody. I appreciate that. Because I honestly, I won't even take if you're not trying to get my attention. I don't read anything that isn't in all caps. I do on every single stream, as weird as it is to watch yourself in these situations, I do go back and thanks, Mighty Bandit. I do go back and rewatch the entire stream because I don't want to miss any of the chat. I do appreciate what you guys say in there and can use it in future streams. So keep the conversation going. We can all, we've got plenty of time left in our lives for now anyway, that we can always pick chats up at a later date, and I can take points that you guys make or contradict me in something I say, and I have absolutely no problem admitting when I'm wrong. So if you guys come to something in the chat, I'm gonna see it. Just if you want me to see it now, early 80s, back when it was Super Truckers, Johnny Big Rigger. That was back when men were men and they were knights of the highway. The good old days of trucking, 70s, 80s, even into the 90s for a little bit. Till cell phones. Cell phones ruined trucking. I will say that. Cell phones have made trucking a ton easier. Whoa, in a cab over. Whoa. Yeah, no, that's okay. You keep those. That's that takes a real man to go over the road in a cab over. But no, I want to try and stick on this medical community responsibility on this, because we can't. Those are nice trucks too. Oh, a Lone Star. I just said Lone Star. The International Lone Star is a nice truck. The Lone Star, that's the cab over version. The International Freightliner Peterbilt, all those cab overs look the same to me. But Black, oh, yeah, I've never seen the Black Dog either. I think that was a Patrick Swayze fantasy. But the doctor's responsibility in all this, they're the ones that we trust with our day-to-day lives. They're the ones that back in the day could be trusted with our day-to-day health, and would openly admit when they were wrong, because they would say, well, we're practicing medicine, it's different for every individual. And now they've kind of abandoned that idea that they can be wrong, or that the science can reveal something new with technological advances, or just the simple fact of the length of time studying something. People are biologically are so different from person to person that you can't. That's why when you see these ads for pharmaceuticals, there's a dozen disclaimers and a dozen or more side effects. The reason they have to list those side effects is because they're not common to every single person, but some people experience this, some people experience that. It's the same thing when it comes to deciding what your good cholesterol level is, and what my good cholesterol level is, and what her good cholesterol level is, and whether or not the cholesterol that you're taking in affects you at all. Right, there was something in the road there, and the Black Dog story typically came from guys back in the 70s, 80s, when trucks got more comfortable than they were in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. Trucks began to become more comfortable with suspension and whatnot, that guys were driving longer hours, pushing their bodies further and further than they ever should be, which is what left us with all of the restrictions on hours that we have today that I think are way overkill. But guys would go far beyond getting into sleep deprivation territory and having hallucinations, mild hallucinations of objects in the road or animals in the road or people in the road. I've experienced sleep deprivation, not behind the wheel of a truck, but in my personal life, my younger, dumber days, I've experienced sleep deprivation and have had hallucinations. They're there and they're gone in an instant. It's not like a psychedelic trip or anything. It's just they do happen. They can cause you to react poorly to the situation because it's not real. And that's what's got the government cracking down on hours of service and driving hours and the limitations on how much we can work in a shift, in a day, in a week, without taking a certain amount of break. And the funny thing is they tell you gotta take the time off, but I believe there's only one state in the country that requires you to sleep for at least some period during that rest break. I believe it was when Tracy Morgan got hit, I believe it was. The driver admitted that he hadn't slept for over 24 hours. I believe that was in Maryland. I believe it's Maryland. If I'm wrong, please somebody correct me. But I believe it's Maryland that has the law that you cannot operate a commercial motor vehicle if you've gone 24 hours without getting sleep. Yeah, you could make some cash back then doing that. There's no doubt in that. It's actually pretty sad. We've got a driver who's driving here, who's been driving for almost 30 years, and with the way the laws have come in and restricted driving, he's making the same now as he did in his first 5 years of driving 30 years ago. Truckers largely haven't seen an increase in wages, a noticeable increase in wages in over 15 years, because we're overregulated. So every time the pay goes up, the hours get reduced that we can work, so we're not making any more money. Don't get me wrong, it is a better living than I ever made as a carpenter. I was a carpenter. I was a short order cook for both of them for about 10 years of my life each, and I'm making 3 times what I could make as a short order cook right now. So it's not a bad way to make a living. It's just getting harder and harder, and as cost of living increases, the actual income goes down. But again, I'm getting sidetracked here. With the medical community, there's got to be some accountability starting to be held to people in the medical profession that, of all other industries, the medical industry needs to be held to a higher standard as far as the truth in what they're doing. We have to stop getting so upset at doctors when they admit they're wrong. Frivolous lawsuits, I think, have led to this at far greater rates than anything the FDA or the USDA can threaten to doctors or researchers, because they make one little mistake and they're already paying astronomical malpractice insurance rates, but they make 1 or 2 minor mistakes that are, I make mistakes in my job. I'm not going to try and say I'm perfect. The difference is that, well, actually, there's not really much of a difference, because if I make a mistake, people can die as well. I mean, today I weigh about 50,000 pounds, cruising down the interstate at 70 miles an hour, and that's we used to call it the 80,000 pound torpedo of death when you're fully loaded. Which is why, please remember, don't cut off semi-trucks. Leave plenty of space when moving back over after overtaking them. Just a little tidbit there. That's exactly right. Who said that? Jen, absolutely perfect point. If we're always right, we never learn. That's why I don't want to see the elimination of opposing political views either, because if you get into your echo chamber and only live within your bubble, we're seeing exactly what happens there with the progressive left right now. They don't want to hear anything else. And people on the right can fall prey to the same sort of thing. That if you live within an echo chamber and you're always right and you never make a mistake, you'll never learn a thing. So it's okay. But again, we're back to what standard we hold. You know, you can't expect that. Okay, my aunt, for example, she didn't sue because she also works. She works in. She's a nursing home administrator, so she doesn't have to. She's not directly in the medical industry, but works closely with the medical industry, and she had I believe it was a lump removed from her breast, and when we removed the lump, a sponge got left behind. She was having troubles with her breast. A few months after the surgery, was still having troubles with her breast. So she had to go back in. They found the sponge. They removed the sponge, no problem. For anybody else, that could have been a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 settlement for something that she has absolutely no lasting effects from anymore. Now, am I justifying doctors lying to us about carbs and fat intake and heart disease because some doctors get sued? Absolutely not. Evil prevails when good men do nothing, and we need to start having some more good doctors. This is not the time or the place for doctors to sit back on their laurels and watch stuff like this disgusting food pyramid that you want to find a direct link to the obesity epidemic in the United States today. It's the food pyramid that has been being pushed since the late 1800s, people. This is not something new. It's not something that's ever been proven as healthy. On the contrary, there's study after study after study that is largely ignored by the medical community and the government as to the ill health effects of consuming large numbers of carbs and sugars and avoiding healthy fats. That it's disgusting. But I am approaching a railroad crossing and I have hazardous materials on, and it's been a pretty good stream. Lots of good conversation going on in the stream. I like that. Looking forward to looking that over. But I am going to go ahead and sign off today so that I can put my 100% full concentration on making sure I don't get squashed by a train with these chemicals on here. Before I jump off, that was not me. That was a cell tower issue. Make sure that you like and subscribe. Make sure you hit the notification bell. I don't have a set time for my streams, so make sure you hit the notification bell so you can see when I'm going live. And make sure you check out and subscribe to a lot of these good people in this stream today and a lot of the subscribers on my list. Make sure you watch yesterday's stream on the First Amendment and freedom of speech, because in there's a little nugget about Flo Rida Hillbilly and the veterans fundraiser that we're hoping to put the final details on in January. Check out and subscribe the auditors on his channel. Check out the Bears. This is Big Rig and Bear, Jamie Coventry. You folks have a great afternoon, great evening, great next day, and these are Thoughts from the Road.